Here are 3 beginner-friendly Christmas cookie designs. They're pretty common cookie shapes, and we're just going to use red, green, and white flood consistency royal icing. The first cookie is a basic stocking, and so I just outlined and flooded the bottom half of the cookie in red, and then I went back and did green and white lines while the icing was still wet. And then I pulled my scribe up and down through the lines. This is called feathering, and it's a wet on wet technique. And then I went back with my scribe and I just worked any peaks back into itself where the icing started to crust over. And to finish the design, I let it sit for about 20 minutes to dry, and then I came back and I flooded the top half of the cookie in white, and I used nonpareils to make it look kind of fuzzy and add some texture. You definitely don't need nonpareils for this. If you want, you could just leave it with the white flood, or even let that flood dry and then use the back of your scribe to break it up to add some texture that way. The next design I have here is a basic wreath. There are so many fun ways to do this design. I am just using one shade of green, but if you use multiple shades of green, it can be really pretty. So here I outlined and flooded with my white royal icing, and then while it's still wet and hasn't crusted over yet, I went around and did green dashes around the border. All 3 of these designs are wet on wet techniques, which means you're adding icing onto the flood before it crusts over, and you have to move really quickly. So to make this look like a wreath, you take your scribe and you pull it through all of those green dashes a few times, and it pulls all those lines together. And then to finish the design, I take my red icing and I do clusters of 3 berries around the wreath. The last design here is a basic Christmas tree. I outlined and flooded the entire tree, including the trunk, in green. As soon as I'm finished with the green flood, I take my white icing and I do a line back and forth up through the whole tree, and then I take my scribe and pull it from the bottom to the top of the tree with one swipe. And then I finish my design with some red dots for the ornaments. To answer some common questions, I am outlining and flooding with the same icing. I don't have a separate consistency for the outline here. And for these wet on wet techniques, the icing should be a looser consistency. I like to compare it to shampoo, just so that it doesn't crust over too quickly.